why are we asked to do this? There are so many better ways to do this if they'd only listen to us. Lack of communication, information, and possible personal threat. Those personal threats should be addressed. I see so many changes that are made that do have implications for people, maybe even threatens their job, how they do their job, so many things, and we need to address these threats. Changes are inconsistent with the desired culture. A lot of changes that are made actually impact culture. They impact the way we do things, the way we think about things. And then, of course, many changes are presumed to be coercive. In other words, somebody's got some agenda, some idea, they're forcing it on us. We suspect their motives. We don't really trust them. And naturally, that's going to get resistance. We certainly see that on the political landscape, even the cultural landscape, where people are driving changes they want to see. And it's really imposed on people. And when you impose changes, they almost automatically get resisted. And then, of course, something very pragmatic, work overload and poor timing. Really, when I'm working with organizations, probably the greatest resistance I have is a natural one, a normal one, that people are just already so overworked and overloaded. They just don't want to get involved in one more change. Okay, next slide. So here are some key concepts that we use professionally in managing change. And my goal has been to take these from the professionals and communicate them to the everyday leader and person in the organization that's involved in change, so that they can learn these same principles. First of all, it needs to be a planned and collaborative process that involves the key stakeholders. And that seems like common sense, but it's so rarely done. A lot of times changes will affect people at the bottom of the organization. Why not involve those people? Listen to them, talk to them, let them help develop the changes. How you do things is as important as what you do. And by the way, this relates to all parts of our life. You see this play out in your life every day. When I saw the names pop up on people attending this webinar, I couldn't help but think of a lot of people. We've got several Robins. I know both of the Robins really well. They are really skilled at people skills and how to relate to people. So they get things done much easier and faster than people who are contentious, difficult, and so on. So all of us need to think about personally, not just in managing change, how you change or how you do things is as important as what you do. You need to know reality before treating what you think is reality. One of the biggest problems we have in managing change is leaders think they know reality, but they really haven't listened to or assessed reality so that they know what's really going on versus what they think is going on. And so the solutions end up being disconnected with what actually needs to be done. Take a systems big picture approach to change, considering the implications. So when people are talking about changes and considering alternatives, they need to ask the question, what would be the implications if we did this? In numerous cases, decisions are made in organizations, for example, to start, let's say, a reward system that motivates people to do something, but it may be motivating the wrong behavior. So we really have to think of the implications of change and the various approaches. The basic model for change management, plan change, is called action research. And it's a very common sense kind of a process here. You identify an opportunity or an issue for change. You appoint a change agent or change champion to champion the change. So a change agent is a professional. So sometimes you do need to bring in a professional, like let's say myself, who's schooled in how to do this. But whatever you do, you need a change champion. That's an internal person who's appointed to see that change through. When there's a change champion and some accountability for seeing the change through, changes get done. By the way, this is an old concept. It's been around forever. In organizations, when anything gets done, somebody is usually championing it. So I just put a name to it. Assess present realities or future ideals. In other words, do your homework, find out what's really the needs are, or research best practices and what you could do to be better. So you need to be well informed, and then you involve the appropriate people in the process. It's really fun, by the way, when top level leaders involve people at the middle, the bottom of the organization in working with them to identify needs for change and how to go about making it. It's really a fun process. One of the most fun things I've done with organizations is to take people at the bottom and get them together to come up with some ideas on how to improve the organization from their perspective. Create a meeting with the top level leaders. And I'll tell you, those people at the bottom, they come in prepared, they've got their slides, they're passionate about what they want to do, and they get the attention of the top level leaders. And it's a win-win for both the leaders and the people I bring in. Implement the change using sound change guidelines, and we're going to look at that and how you can develop a list of guidelines, and always build in reliable feedback mechanisms along the way. In other words, listen to people, do surveys, whatever you need to do to find out if the change is working or not working. Literally been involved in changes where 3 years down the line, the change was going haywire and the leaders never knew it. But they had no feedback mechanisms to track the change. And then a really critical process is to learn from the process. I wonder if you have ever been involved, unless you were probably in the military or perhaps a sports team, if you have ever learned from changes that were made. In other words, you were involved in a change process. Did they ever take the time, especially near the end, to look at that process and say, what can we learn from it and pass this information on to others? So what happens is virtually no learning that goes on from managing changes. And then the positive involvement of leaders significantly increases the probability of successful change. So in other words, if you're going to make changes, somewhere along the way, you need to involve and engage the leaders, the appropriate leaders at whatever level you're at, so they own the changes and they're communicating the need for change. When a leader says it's important, we pay attention. If the leaders are disengaged, we disregard it. Okay, next slide. Here are the 3 things that you need to do to design changes successfully. And you can learn these fairly quickly. When I do change management workshops for organizations, usually takes about a half day. It's not really all that involved. But basically what you need to do is teach them 3 things. One is to have or develop a model for managing change so they understand the process. And I'm going to show you one. Secondly, to create some kind of a planning form. You can usually do that on about 1 page, 2 at the most. And I'll show you how to do that. And then third, to develop these guidelines for managing change. And you can for sure get those on 1 page. And they can be used by you. They can be used throughout the organization, which would be the ideal. So let's look at a model. Now, if you look at the next page, you see a model that is a playoff, by the way, of probably the original model for managing change that was developed by Kurt Lewin. And his 3 stages, by the way, he called them unfreezing, change, and refreezing. In other words, you unfreeze the old kind of behaviors, consider some new things to do, you implement them, and then you sustain them. So we can have some different titles for this. I just chose the 3. You prepare people for change, you implement the change using sound guidelines, and then you transition the change so that it is likely to last. So you don't need to know all the details of this model as much as just to have in your mind those 3 stages. And by the way, they're dynamic, they move back and forth. You can prepare and be in the implementation stage and then have to go back and do more preparation or make changes. The thing is that you have to remember is that for a change to last, it really has to go through 3 stages. You got to prepare people. And by the way, most organizations do little, if any, preparation. The change is just announced, and all of a sudden we're faced with new ways of doing things. The implementation process isn't planned, and there really is no effort to transition the change, to make it last, learn from it, pass that information on. So I have some steps in there to kind of guide you through that process. But really what you need to remember is these 3 stages. And then I've given you some steps down there that you can consider in managing the change process. So look at the next slide, and it gives some ideas for developing a change planning form. So you can create this for yourself or with your team or with your organization. That would be the ideal. You create these kind of steps. So if we're going to change something, and it's pretty significant, what's the reason for doing it? What would be the desired change, and what would be the best person to lead it or champion it? What are the goals? I'm involved in a change process right now, and so far we haven't really talked about the reasons for, well, somewhat the reasons for change. We do kind of have a champion. We haven't set any goals. We don't really know what the end process would look like if we are successful. What are some of the implications if we do various changes? What are we doing to make a reality check along the way to see what's working and not working? What are some of the forces that we have working for us, like people that are going to support the change, forces working against us? We know people that are going to resist it. And if you go to the next page, you see making some notes about what are we going to do to prepare people, to implement it, to transition it, those 3 stages of change. So if you do all of that, you are very likely to plan a change that has a high probability of success. And it's probably good if you're going to champion a change to work through that form yourself, but you also want to engage the appropriate people in the process and let them help plan that whole process of thinking it through. It doesn't take that long to do it, but it results in a planned approach to change. Now, the last thing is guidelines, developing guidelines for managing change. So go to the next slide. And this is the key to the whole thing. So this is the crescendo to this webinar, is for you to motivate, hopefully your organization, if not a department you're in, or maybe even a team you're on, to develop some guidelines for managing change. So that if you're going to make a significant change, you don't have to use these for all little changes, but for a significant change, that you actually think through whatever's on your guidelines for managing change. So, by the way, I have all my students do this and encourage them to then share it with their organization. So if you were a student, you probably heard this at one time or another. But can you imagine if the leaders in your organization had a guideline sheet like this, and they actually used it in planning significant changes? Not that they would have to follow every step, but that they would at least be thinking about these guidelines when they made changes. I can almost assure you their success in managing change would go from a 70% or 50% failure rate to more like a 50 or 70% or more success rate. By the way, I can tell you that you may get resistance to doing this from leaders. I'm thinking of one particular major change I was involved in. And by the way, not on our campus, but it was a University of Colorado kind of issue. And I could tell they were going off in the wrong direction and how they were going to manage this change process. It wasn't going to work. And I tried to get their attention. And so I even brought them a list of guidelines and said, would it be possible for us to look at this? Well, I had trouble even getting on the agenda to present it, but they weren't interested once I did. And by the way, the program staggered, stuttered, sputtered, and 3 years later, they closed it down. So these are so key to managing change. So I'll just go through these very quickly. The idea, you can use these or create your own. First one, do your homework before you initiate changes. Find out what's really going on. Gather data if you need to. Know what the real issues or opportunities are, not necessarily what you think they are. Engage and involve the right people in the process, planning, designing the changes, managing the changes. Consider that how you change things is as important as what you change, and evaluate the implications of all the alternatives. Create compelling reasons for change. You really need to spend time on this. If you've got a significant change, get some people together and say, what can we communicate to people that would be compelling for them to get involved in this change and making it work? Appoint a change champion. And if needed, a change team to guide the process. Think about ways to make the incentive for change greater than the incentive to stay the same. Go to the next slide. Communicate, and communicate. Change takes a lot of communication. There are misunderstandings. There's misinformation out there. You really have to keep people informed about what's going on. I've said this in some of the other webinars, but Chancellor Reddy created these forums where all faculty, staff, and even students were invited. And I think he usually had maybe 500 or 600 people show up for these things on a monthly basis during the pandemic, communicating what's going on, what the university's doing, answered questions openly. So when you're open with communications, you're transparent, you've increased the probability of investment in change considerably. And by the way, at the top of the list is communicating or creating a safe environment for people to be truthful, straightforward, candid, whether it's their resistance, their ideas, or whatever, to feel safe to be able to communicate during this change process. Use strategic involvement. What that means is people's time is valuable. And so as you plan involvement, make sure that it's very strategic. In other words, you only involve people where they can be helpful, where it's needed. You plan things well so it doesn't waste their time. You have good follow-up so they know things are getting done. Take care of your change champions. Acknowledge these people, encourage them, celebrate successes, learn from failures, but pay attention to your change champions. They're investing their time, their effort, they're taking risk. Look out for their welfare, and then follow through and learn from the change process. So the idea is, after a change has been made, go back, get the right people together, talk about what did we do that we really did well? What did we do that we didn't do so well? What changes could we make in the future? How can we communicate what we've learned to others? So the idea is to create this learning organization that eventually gets highly skilled at managing change. Now, quick wrap up, and then I've reserved time for questions. So start thinking of anything you'd like to ask. And I presume you can send it through the chat or whatever. But I would love to be able to answer your questions. So here's the wrap up to this whole thing. Recognize that developing skills in managing change will be important to you personally and to your organization. And so you want to think about yourself. How well am I managing the changes I'm affected by, not just at work, but especially in my personal life? And by the way, these are really difficult, challenging times. The pandemic has changed relationships, the dynamics in families, all kinds of things are happening on a personal level. Our culture is changing dramatically. I mean, there's so many things going on. So you want to stop and think, how am I managing this? Is it getting the best of me, or am I staying on top of it? Basically, in facing change, we have two options. We can face the change and all the realities and all the options that are involved and do it in a positive way, or we can add to that, where we've still got the realities we're facing, we can add to it being upset, angry, frustrated, stressed, and so on. And that part is really an option. Now, what I would like to see as a result of this is for each of us to become a champion for training leaders and others in our organization in skills of managing change. And in other words, we want to promote in our organizations the idea that people need to learn how to manage change, especially leaders, but really people at all levels. Secondly, making managing change an important part of decision making. In other words, we want to encourage, when you're involved in any kind of decision making, to consider, if we're going to make certain changes, what are the implications and how can we do it in an effective way? And third, creating opportunities for your organization to become skilled at managing change and developing some guidelines. So what I want to do now is open this up for anything that you want to ask about managing change. So Alyssa, I hope that somebody has sent a question in.
I have a comment, and I encourage everyone, you can either raise your hand, if you know how to raise your hand on it's just clicking the little button next to yours, or you can come off mute or put it in the chat. I do have a comment that I'll share. So Jacqueline, I hope this is right, Mayer. Hi, Dr. Warrick. I'm class of 2010. I've always wanted to take one of your classes during my time at UCCS. They always filled so fast. I'm in Hawaii now and working in the Army medical community. They're going through extreme organizational change right now. This topic is perfect. So more of a comment, but.
Well, and by the way, again, I would go back to kind of the wrap up. Since you are experiencing all these changes that are going on, now you're well equipped to say, you know, we need to think about how we go about this change. We need to think about the implications. Can we plan the change in a way that's likely to increase the success? So that's why, by the way, it's very important to copy, download these slides so that you can use them with your organization. Okay, any other ones come in, Alyssa?
I don't see another question yet, but how about I'll tee this off. So you had mentioned that you and your classes share. Oh, I had one come in. So what are the best practices for managing? This was actually what I was going to ask. Great question, Troy. So Troy Roden said, what are best practices for managing up for change management? The internal sale is more challenging than the external sale.
Yeah, is that ever a great question? And you know, the answer, first of all, is earn the credibility to get their attention. In other words, you perform well, you have a great attitude, you be part of the solutions, not part of the problem. That gives you the credibility then to communicate with your boss and perhaps others upward. You can also circulate like even a handout like this and maybe encourage those above you to have a gathering of leaders where you all could talk about these things. You can circulate articles. I know students who actually start a book club and they will have great books on leadership, managing change or whatever. And maybe once a month, you know, people get together and kind of share ideas. and those things tend to grow. I had one student who did that, started with his own group, and then there were others that got interested and they started being involved, and it actually became a monthly event that people throughout the organization attended. So you can bring in speakers. There are, of course, all kinds of videos available on managing change. I love to go into organizations and talk about this, and I tell them, create an hour, for a lunch or whatever, kind of like this, and I'll talk to your leaders about it. So there are all kinds of innovative ways to get the attention of those people, but you're asking a really critical question, because if you can't get the attention of your leaders, you can certainly improve in your area how effectively they manage change. But to hope that it would spread throughout the organization would probably be naive. So wonderful question.
Don, can you perhaps share, you mentioned the book club, and do you have a couple recommended top picks from your change management books that might be a great book to introduce for those kind of conversations?
There are a lot of books that I use in my classes. For example, Wooden on Leadership is a great book to use. Good to Great by Jim Collins. He also co-authored Built to Last. I do have some specific books I use on managing change at times, but particularly there are a lot of really good books now on positive leadership. One by Kim Cameron is actually titled Positive Leadership. Let's see, another one, I forget exactly. The Power of Positive Leadership by Gordon. And these don't just address change, more the broader concept of leadership, with at least a chapter or two on change and the need to make it a positive, not a negative kind of an experience.
Wonderful. Thank you, Don. Are there any other, I don't see any other additional questions in the chat. Any comments or questions? You also come off of mute.
Well, just in closing then, let me encourage you, send me ideas if you have about ways that we can have an impact in terms of leadership, culture, and teaching, either in the College of Business, UCCS, the community. I'd love to hear your ideas. I'm going to probably form an advisory group sometime soon to consider things that we can do, because we're committed to having an impact. I want to make this endowment a high impact endowment. I'm invested in it. I have a passion for it. So I would sure welcome your ideas. And one last thing, Alyssa, you may have noticed in the background all kinds of Christmas decorations in my office. And this is being held in December, Christmas time. So I certainly want to wish all of you a wonderful Christmas and a very happy New Year. And thank you so much for attending my webinar. There will be more to come.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for your attendance. And just in closing, we'll be sending a follow-up email that'll include a link for the slides. And there will also be a link on the website as well. You can visit the Dr. Warrick 50. We'll send that in the chat as well. And in the email, if you'd like to visit the Kudo board to make a gift. Again, your support on this makes a difference and makes it so that we can continue to have these kind of impactful programs, and really, to Don's point earlier, expand some of this programming as well to make sure that we have a continued impact. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day and holiday season as well. Thank you.
Have a Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas. And thank you, Alyssa.
Absolutely. I'll make sure to record some of these comments or just thoughts, Don, too.
Oh, great. By the way, I'll hang on a few minutes if anybody wants to chat.
Just adding, and can you see the chat, Don?
Yes, I've been following it.
Okay,
It was
good.
fun to watch.
I was gonna say, there's some nice comments there too, just, you know, and sharing their thoughts and impact and everything. That was awesome, per usual. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, I think then we can close and we'll get sent out the other, well, Garrett and I will work on the follow-up email.
Okay, and thank you again, Alyssa. Thank you, Garrett.
Yeah, absolutely.
Glad I could help. Fun event and wonderful job, Dr. Work.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was a really good one. I like this a lot. Very